The idea is that we borrow an hour from the morning when it's not very useful and add it to the afternoon when it's a lot more useful. My survey shows that the average Queenslander, and Queenslanders wake up early, rises at about 6:05 on weekdays and 6:40 on weekends, which means even if you're an early bird, you're wasting about an hour of daylight in the morning. That could be much better applied in the evening.
Right. Now, before we get to your survey, which I found absolutely fascinating, the numbers that you were able to collate, talk to us about the actual biological effect of daylight saving on people.
Yeah, and there are two, and one is related to the actual time change itself, and that's the one that biochronologists tend to fixate on. So we do lose an hour of sleep, and sometimes that makes us a bit groggy. Likewise, when we do fall back in the autumn, we gain that hour back. But there are lots of biological effects throughout the daylight saving period in that we're typically getting more exercise. Studies have shown that children watch less television, and there are a number of beneficial effects throughout the 6-month period of adjustment.
All right, Professor Thomas Sigler, let's go to your survey now. Now, earlier in the year, you did a survey of over 1,000 people across Australia. You found that 80% were in favour of daylight savings. Why is that? Why did they say, yes, we actually do need daylight savings?
The response rate was highest in states that have it, indicating that many people are quite satisfied with the status quo, which is that they don't mind changing twice a year and they actually enjoy the extra hour in the afternoons. The response rate, of course, was lowest in Queensland and Queensland and Western Australia. And unsurprisingly, it was lowest in Western Australia because Perth, unlike the rest of the capital cities in Australia, is actually on the west coast of its time zone, whereas the majority of the other capital cities are on the east coast of their time zones.
Right. Okay, so we know that certain states and territories don't want daylight savings, as your survey just showed. Your survey also showed that it was tradies and labourers who were not so much in favour of it.
Yeah, that's right. And to clarify, every state was in favor. Even WA was 64% in favor. It's just that the southern states were more in favor at about 85%. Tradies and laborers typically may not want daylight saving because they spend all days outdoors. So whether the sun shines from 5 to 5 or 6 to 6 is almost immaterial. It's typically office workers and white-collar occupations who are most favorable.
Okay, so if your survey says that 80% of Australians want daylight savings, they're in favour of it, why don't we have it right across Australia?
So Queensland, Northern Territory, and WA extend into the tropics, and it's not very useful in the tropics. So, at the latitude of Darwin or Cairns, there's very little variation between the summertime and the wintertime. Those 3 particular jurisdictions are also very large, so there's a lot of variation within the state. And the major population centers are at the south, but there are a number of residents in the north who might be adversely impacted. So primarily a political issue in the 3 jurisdictions that don't have it.
I find it interesting that China only has one time zone. They don't have daylight savings. How does it work for them?
Yeah, so China's time zone regime is very centrally politicized, and that's so it makes activities easier to coordinate across space. I think it works out really well if you're in the center or the west. It's not a surprise that solar noon is approximately noontime in Beijing, so it's calibrated to Beijing. And if you're in Beijing or slightly west of Beijing, I think it works out really well. If you're in the extreme west, like Kashgar, it may not be so great. And if you're in the extreme east, like Harbin, it also may not be so great.
All right, coming back home to Australia, we know that daylight saving kind of kicks in at 2 a.m. Why 2 a.m. in particular?
It's the least disruptive. So it happens in your sleep. Your mobile phone automatically adjusts, and when you wake up in the morning, you barely know it's happened.
All right, for those of us, particularly those of us who work on weekend breakfast and have to get up very early in the morning, if some of us have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, what time do we set our alarm?
I would set your alarm for 1:59.
1:59, right? Okay, so we would still lose an hour of sleep. Is that right?
You do lose an hour of sleep this time of year.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's no such thing as 2:30 tomorrow morning.